Hello, I'm Beryl Dov-Lerner. I teach at the Western Galilee College in Akko, Israel, and this is my presentation, Khazars or Killers of Prophets, the Origins of an Anti-Zionist Paradox. It's prepared for the 5th International Conference on Israel and Judaism Studies. So, way of a general introduction and how I got interested in this problem. Unfortunately, I wasted a lot of time on social media, and I've noticed that when I get into discussions about Zionism and the Jews, I often come across people who seem to believe in a mutually contradicting pair of ideas, one of which is that the Jews, since time immemorial, have been a focus of evil in the world and a plot for world domination and the destruction of proper religion. And this is encapsulated in the notion that Jews are the killers of prophets since ancient times. On the other hand, there's another idea that modern Jews, contemporary Jews, aren't really related at all to the ancient Jews, and they're in fact the descendants of a people who we will come to hear of called the Khazars. And because they are merely the descendants of these Khazars, they cannot make any historical claims to connection to the land of Israel, since, after all, their ancestors were Russian Europeans and had no origin in the Middle East. So where do we come across the idea in Islamic sources that Jews are the killers of prophets? This actually appears, I think, 9 times in the Quran, according to the article I'm citing here by G.S. Reynolds. You can, if you're interested, you can look up these various sources in which during, I think in the context of that early competition between Judaism and very early Islam, at a time when Prophet Muhammad was interested in converting those Jews to Islam, this accusation that they were the killers of prophets was a trope that came up several times. What is the source of this notion that Jews are the killers of prophets? Well, it has its Jewish source, and here I've brought a list of citations from the Hebrew Bible, from the Jewish Bible, in which we hear stories about kings of Judah having prophets sent to death. We have a story from Chronicles about the prophet Zechariah, which apparently was very important for later development of this notion. Jeremiah talks about a situation like this. And in the book of Kings, we read how Jezebel, who was actually she was an Israelite queen, but she was of Phoenician extraction, and she was trying to bring the Phoenician god Baal into Israelite practice. She also killed many prophets. This idea continued in the Christian Bible. And here are a few sources in which we find in Acts, Matthew, and Luke that Jews are referred to also as being the killers of prophets. I think what happens here is a very common process in the development of anti-Jewish attitudes, that accusations which find their origin in an internal Jewish discourse of self-criticism are later taken up by other religions, not as a model for their own internal critical discourse in which they criticize themselves, but rather simply they take the Jewish complaints about Jewish behavior as evidence for the wickedness of the Jews and as an excuse for persecuting Jews. So we've seen that there is an idea, for instance, that Jews are the killers of prophets. This has appeared in the Quran, other Islamic sources. How is this taken up? It really wasn't taken up very much in traditional Islam. Here I have a passage from Bernard Lewis's Semites and Anti-Semites, in which he explains that Islamic attitudes towards Jews, traditional attitudes, weren't so bad. And sometimes better, sometimes worse, a certain degree of persecution, perhaps. But certainly nothing like as he says, the characteristic and distinctive features of Christian anti-Semitism did not appear. There were no fears of Jewish conspiracy and domination, no charges of diabolical evil. And for instance, Jews were not accused of poisoning wells or spreading the plague. So Jews simply do not have that same role as being a focus of evil in the world in traditional Islam that they did in Christian Europe. Here we have a further description of the differences between these ideas from Kunzel's article. He writes, Muslims treated Jews with contempt or a condescending toleration. The hatred of Jews fostered in the Quran and the Sunnah pursued the goal of keeping them subjugated as second-class subjects, dhimmis. Hostility was accompanied by devaluation. But the views of Christian anti-Semites, in which Jews represented a powerful and permanent threat to the world, was absurd within this Muslim mindset. So in that case, how did that idea of some kind of powerful Jewish conspiracy rooted in just this ancient, inherent Jewish evil of killers of prophets, how did it find its way into the Arab and Islamic world? Well, the answer is, it seems that the Nazis brought it in. And as we read in Kunzel's article, Nazi propagandists, in the course of their efforts to mobilize the Arabs against the Jews, discovered that their racist anti-Semitism was met with incomprehension. As a consequence, they started to use the Islamic creed as a way to gain access to the Muslim masses. Well, the historical background here is Britain and, to extent, France versus the Germans in trying to gain a foothold in the Arab consciousness and to gain good connections with the Arab world. And we have the Nazi propagandists hoping to get the Arabs to accept an Islamicized form of their own anti-Semitic ideology and get them to accept it as a tool against the burgeoning Zionist movement. And it seems we actually know how this began. The first text that propagated sheer Jewish hatred in an Islamic context by combining episodes of conflict with Jews from Muhammad's life with the so-called wickedness of the Jews in the 20th century was a 31-page pamphlet in Arabic called Islam and Jewry, published in August 18, 1937 in Cairo. This is what Kunzel writes, and he explains in the article the part that the Nazis had in the publication of this pamphlet. And there we read, the battle between the Jews and Islam began when Muhammad fled from Mecca to Medina. At that time, the Jewish methods were already the same as today. Their weapon was as ever defamation. They said Muhammad was a swindler. They tried to undermine Muhammad's honor. They began to ask Muhammad senseless and unsolvable questions. But with this method too, as before, they had no success, so they tried to eradicate the Muslims. Here we have the idea of this very early conflict between Muslims and Jews becoming a model of some kind of eternal battle between the Islamic world and some kind of Jewish conspiracy to destroy it. All right, so far we know that the killers of prophets became an important idea through Nazi intervention. Now, what about the issue of Jewish origins in Europe? Well, just here is an example of the use of this in anti-Semitism and anti-Zionist an anti-Zionist meme, which I found on Facebook. Khazaria is their nationality, Zionism is their political ideology, communism is the rule of law, Satanism is their religion, they are a disease and they are everywhere. This is, has obvious Nazi roots and roots in classical European anti-Semitism, the protocols of the elders of Zion, combined with this notion that the Jews of Europe, at least, and that's the majority, the Ashkenazim, have their origin in the Russian European Khazaria. So what is Khazaria? Here's just a quick quote from the Britannica article on it. Khazar, any member of a confederation of Turkic-speaking tribes that established a commercial empire in European Russia in the late 6th century. People of the northern Caucasus region, the Khazars allied with the Byzantines against the Persians in the 7th century and warred with the Arabs until the mid-8th century. Their empire extended westward along the Black Sea, and they controlled trade routes and exacted tribute from their neighbors. The ruling class adopted Judaism and maintained close relations with the Byzantine emperors. That is sort of the legend or the story of the Jewish connection. Elsewhere in the article explains that textual witnesses dating from the 9th and 10th centuries claim the Khazars adopted Judaism in the 8th century. These texts are not without problems, however, and lack of archaeological or other physical evidence indicating a mass conversion has called both the extent and historicity of this conversion into doubt. And they declined in the 10th century, crushed by Kiev in the end of that century in 965. The idea of the Khazar theory, and of course, this could be the subject of a whole book, the proliferation of this theory. The basic idea is that most Jews, certainly Ashkenazic Jews, are descendants of these Khazars somehow, and thus they have no connection to the ancient Jews and Israelites who lived in the land of Israel. How did this theory develop? Well, interestingly, this is once again a case of an idea which developed outside of the Arab and Islamic world. Here I have an article by Rory Miller, in which he explains the Khazar theory had been introduced into the policy debate over Palestine and the wider Jewish question in 1920, the same year that Britain was assigned the mandate. And he explains how there had been an Anglo-American mission to Poland to discover the condition of the Jews there. And there was a certain Captain Peter Wright, who was a member of the British delegation, who refused to sign off on the findings of the sufferings of the Jews in Poland, and instead issued a minority report. Among many other points of historical and contemporary interest, his dissenting opinion noted how during the 8th and 9th centuries, there was a great kingdom of Tartars to the north of the Black Sea called the Khazars, he writes, the Khazars, of which a large and the upper portion were converted to Judaism. And here for the first time, he is using this kind of quasi-historical, quasi-legendary notion of the Khazar kingdom as having become having converted into a kind of Jewish kingdom, as serving as the main source of the population of European Ashkenazic Jewry, and that because of this, the great mass of Jews who were the Jews in Poland who were being reported on by the commission could not be considered to be the descendants of the ancient Jews who lived in the land of Israel, and thus the whole Zionist project would not make sense. People are interested in this. In Rory Miller's article, he continues to explain how various politicians in the internal British debate over the Balfour Declaration and support for the Zionist project took up the notion that that the European Jews certainly, and perhaps the Jews in general, had no historical rights to the land of Israel because they were all simply descendants of these Russian European Khazars. So how did this British idea find its way into Arab and Islamic discourse? Well, here Miller claims that in the period before World War II, the main focus of Arab arguments against Zionist claims were their rights under the McMahon-Hussein Agreement and the illegitimacy of the Balfour Declaration. However, in the post-1945 era, the Khazar theory increasingly became a staple of Arab arguments against Zionism in London, Washington, and at the United Nations. So here we have certainly a problematic historical argument which found its original home in British politics, eventually in British anti-Zionist politics, finding its way into Arab anti-Zionism. And so by 1947, we have Jamal Husseini of the Arab Higher Committee saying Western Jews, known as Ashkenazim, are descendants of the Khazars who converted to Judaism. And Sir Abdul Rahman saying the Khazars of Eastern Europe were converted to Judaism. Can their descendants possibly claim any rights simply because the ancestors of their co-religionists had once settled in Palestine? So here we've very quickly gone through the outside sources of these two very important elements in anti-Zionist discourse in the Arab and Islamic world, where we have the notion of a great Jewish evil conspiracy against Islam actually being developed as a kind of mirror of Nazi discourse, and the Khazar argument being brought in from its original home in British politics. I think that the different and alien origins of both the Islamic demonization of Jews and the Arab adoption of Khazar theory helps us to understand how these two mutually contradictory ideas came to take a central place in contemporary anti-Zionist discourse. Because when you have ideas which really did not develop together and have no natural home in the Arab world and in Islamic discourse, is not so surprising that they don't really fit together, because it was not something which they did not develop together in an integrated way through history. So if anyone is interested in looking up the sources that I've brought, I will just show you my bibliography. And I also have my email here if anyone would like to contact me with further questions and comments. Thank you very much.